Mr. President, for whatever reason you decided to invite two members of Parliament to come and speak up for God. It wasn't, I suspect, because MPs are universally regarded as moral people. But it's great to be here. In 2003, the Wall Street Journal produced a summary of a meta-study published in the American Psychologist, led by Dr. Linda Powell, who was not a practicing member of any religion, which looked across all the studies which had correlated individual outcomes with religious belief. She found an astonishing correlation for individual health, a correlation so much that, in fact, lifespans, people were 25% less likely to die prematurely if they had religious belief. She looked at a number of societal items. For example, levels of infidelity were much lower than in the wider societal average. And the Wall Street Journal made the point that they excluded any study which hadn't got proper control groups, which eliminated out those studies that hadn't looked at other factors that could have been behind it. They concluded there was a residual factor which couldn't be accounted for. In 2008, Gallup, which I think is still the world's largest polling organisation, did an international comparison. Now, we've just heard that we've had international measures of things like happiness, well-being, and success. Now, those are all rather subjective things, and there are various different ways of measuring them. Let me give you a straightforward objective measure that was done by Gallup. They looked at the 60 largest countries in the world and asked a very simple question: what is the correlation between suicide, the ultimate expression of hopelessness and despair, and religion? And it's almost a straight line graph. All of the third most religious countries fall into the lower half for suicide. All of the third least religious countries, wherever they are in the world, fall into the top half of countries for suicide. By all means, yes. Could you speak up? Sorry. It may well be, but it's also a sign that they want to go on living. As a member of Parliament, one cannot help be aware from one's constituency surgeries of the amount of misery, hopelessness and despair which is out there. Religion does make a difference. We heard a lot about child abuse. My own church, the Catholic Church, some of the things that have happened in Ireland. I don't accept what the earlier speaker said about the Pope, this Pope or either of his predecessors. But the fact is that this is a church which today is running 15,000 schools in India. And in this country, parents are fighting to get into our schools. I believe very strongly that we should study science. I don't believe we should worship it. Let's take as an example the greatest, arguably, 19th century scientist, Charles Darwin. In 1906, the New York Municipal Zoo had a cage with Ota Benga, who was a pygmy, aged 23, destitute, in with a chimpanzee, with a rather patronising comment outside about how this showed the spectrum of the species. It was organised by an American called Madison Grant, who went on to found the American Eugenics Society after he was inspired by the president of the British Eugenics Society, Leonard Darwin, who was Charles Darwin's son, was one of the 6 members of the Darwin family who were major lights in that organisation. It taught a number of things, including the segregation of the feeble-minded and the sterilisation with X-rays of those who were inadequate. They sent 2 representatives in 1935 to the great conference in Berlin, one of whom, incidentally, was Mary Stopes, now revered by many people, the conference in 1935 where the Nazi Party set out its blueprint for improving the German population. Now, I just give this as an example because there are very few greater scientists than Charles Darwin. I also believe, though, that as a moralist he was profoundly wrong, and his family carried on his legacy. The difference between those who believe in religion, certainly the Christian religion, which I'm principally here to argue for, and those who worship as opposed to study science, is a belief that we have choice. There's grown up among some scientists a belief that the physical universe is closed, that everything can be accounted for by the laws of nature alone, that there is no such thing as choice, that everything we do, whether it's getting up and walking out of here, whether it's making a moral decision, whether to be kind to somebody or not to be kind to somebody, is purely about chemistry of the brain, that consciousness is somehow a powerless shadow, whereas Christians believe, as indeed do most of the other great religions, that consciousness is not just a shadow. We have free will. We can make moral choices. And at the bottom of the Christian religion, and certainly at the bottom of the New Testament, testimony of the man who misguided people like myself believe is the Son of God, is the belief that those choices should be made to follow the wishes of God and to serve our fellow man. Society, I'm afraid you've just heard the first ping, so I can't give way to you, sir. Society is the better for people who believe. Thank you.